week's episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Grab a seat at the table as Masters rowing coaches Marlene Royal and Rebecca Caro share their biggest secrets on how to unleash your hidden potential and plot a new course for real results on the water and off. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where today we're talking about big event preparation. I'm Rebecca Caro, and I'm joined by Marlene Royal.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello to our audience.
Big events are happening all over the place. We've had national championships in the US last weekend, in the UK a couple of weeks ago, a month ago now, thereabouts. Australia. And this is always a challenge for a masters group because there are so many moving parts, different lineups, boats. How do you optimize so that everybody gets a good race? But some people are going to have to row with people who are not so good as them, which is always I think often a source of tension is the polite answer. So today we're going to bring you an interview that I did last week with Monmouth Rowing Club. Now, they're a club in the UK. In fact, they're in Wales. And their club coach is Tim Mail. He's quite new to the club. And the reason that we have picked them as an interview subject is they're a smaller masters rowing club. And they managed to win the Victor Ludorum prize at the British Rowing Masters Championships. So that's the points for every race you win. They got more points than anyone else.
Cool.
We also, Faster Masters, sponsored the prize, so we obviously have a vested interest in this. But I think you're going to find some of the things that Tim has to talk about really interesting. Let's see what he has to say. Talking about rowing and interviewing interesting people and their pathways through the sport since 2013. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today I'm delighted to welcome as my guest, Tim Mail. Tim, hello.
Hi, how are things?
Nice to see you online. So Tim and I know each other because we were both rowing at Tidbury Scullers School a while ago, and life has moved on and taken us in slightly divergent paths. So I was delighted to find out when Faster Masters Rowing, who's my business, sponsored the Victor Ludorum prize at the British Rowing Masters Championships this past June, to find that the winners were Monmouth Rowing Club. And so I approached them and said, hey, could we interview you to talk about the fact that you've won this prize? And they said, yes, speak to our coach. He's called Tim Mail. So how do you end up coaching a Welsh rowing club when I thought you lived in London?
Well, until fairly recently, I was. What happened was that I moved over with my partner at the time and my youngest daughter to Abergavenny, moved over at the August 2021 after Henry Royal. So I picked up, and Monmouth was the natural choice to go to, as it fit the geography right, and got stuck in with them, and that was really the start of things to sort of get to know the club and to see how things were building up.
I think Monmouth is a great example of a town rowing club. I've raced there, so I know what it looks like, and it's a very pretty stretch of river, I recall. But it is the town rowing club. I'm guessing it doesn't have a massive draw. How far do people drive to join and row at the club?
So westward, it's got a bit of a draw. So Abergavenny is about 20 miles away. So essentially, I would say it's probably got a radius of about 20 miles westward and probably about 10, 15 miles east, because soon after that you get to Ross, and obviously that might be a choice for people to go to. So north of it is Hereford. So essentially you do have a reasonable catchment to draw people in. and it is a nice stretch of river to row on.
So when you joined the club, you joined as an athlete, but shortly they worked out, obviously, that you have a pedigree and you have a coaching experience pedigree as well as an athlete, and you ended up coaching. So when you joined the club, what was it like?
What was quite apparent to me was that there were a lot of talented individuals and people with a history of doing very well, but as it was, they'd been broken up into small groups and they hadn't really been coordinating well with each other to build up large projects. So they had some private projects that were going on, and that was quite nice. But in terms of the general sort of ethos of building as a squad and building as a club, that it was a little bit fragmented. So that was the first thing that drew my attention.
So you obviously worked with the captain and the committee to restructure the training group. Do you want to kill the dog, or is it just going to yap?
I think he's just going to keep going. It's not my dog.
Not my dog. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah.
We like dogs and small children.
Yeah.
That's fine. So talk to us about the changes that you persuaded them to make in that first year when you were coaching.
So the first and probably the biggest change that we looked at was generating a club culture that brought everyone together. It's naturally a friendly club, so there was half the job was done, but in terms of getting people to row across the board, that was something that we really looked at. Initially, we'd even started, we mentioned quite early on about the options of mixed crews, which obviously in the British Masters we fielded quite a few, and that certainly bore fruit.
Tell me about how many active rowers there are at Monmouth Rowing Club.
So in terms of active or competitive rowers, so active rowers, we've probably got about 60, maybe a few more, 60 active rowers. In the sort of Masters section, we've got a few non-masters, but it is predominantly a Masters group. So we are, in terms of a Masters focus, that's very helpful. But we do have obviously some who are looking for younger events like Henley Royal, etc. But really, in terms of the Masters focus, we had a reasonable amount. We have a large contingent of those who've been there, got the T-shirt, etc. That actually maybe not so serious. So and they were mixed in with a group of very inexperienced, essentially learn to row graduates. So we had a quite a broad group there to manage, which we set out as the club group, which may not have a higher competitive focus, but still obviously that they're paying their subs and they deserve to get coaching as well. So we set them up and we look at their various different goals and set them up for them. And then we have the two sort of more focus groups, which are the performance groups, so performance men's group, a performance women's group, and they are looking at some bigger goals. So they're looking more at the national and international events. Everybody clubs together for the regional and local events because we like to support them when we can. But yes, for the more slightly higher standard events, obviously we're looking more at the performance groups.
Now, you mentioned that there were some private projects, and in my experience, persuading people to give up their private projects in pursuit of a more common goal is a really challenging thing. So how did you manage that?
I think the process of actually getting coaching, the idea of actually getting value from coaching was the thing which was the main draw. The club was with the introduction of me as a coach, the club subs went up to pay for the coach, so it made it a sustainable venture, and therefore people knew that they were paying something for that service, and they looked at the service and they saw what value they could get from it, and whether they could get a better performance out of being in a more universal structure rather than essentially in more of a niche boat. So that's really where that focus came in. That
keep going.
Sorry, there was essentially there was a financial payment that they would be making whether they took advantage of the situation or not, and that there was essentially an overhaul of the training structure and the coaching that they wouldn't normally get access to.
That's brilliant. So can I just ask how much are the club subs for an adult membership for a year?
I actually can't remember.
No, that's okay.
So I couldn't. I'm afraid I'll refrain to comment at this point in time.
So Tim, what do you provide as a coach? How frequently do they get coached? Do they get a training program? How's it organised?
So generally what I do is I put out a scope of a program that we have some broad goals in terms of the regatta programs and the training. And the trainings we tend to set on sort of 4 week to 5 week blocks where we're preparing, how we set things up in terms of, are we aiming for a major event? Are we working to just do some racing? Those sort of things. So those change for different groups. Well, realistically, between the performance men, the performance women, and the club group, they get 2 coach sessions per week, and so the rest of the sessions they do are uncoached. So I'm relying on their intrinsic motivation for them to get them through those sessions. But yeah, that's so it's actually not a vast amount of coaching that we can get in. But obviously, we need to strike a good balance between the coaching and the subs, because, like I said, we made it sustainable and we can't really over-egg things too much.
So I'm guessing most of that coaching's at the weekend in the daylight.
Yes. So in summertime, we're quite lucky. We tend to work Tuesday evenings and Wednesday evenings for long extended sessions, and those essentially are for all the squads. There are some slight different emphases that we put in. So the Wednesdays will have the club group will get priority, and the Tuesdays the performance groups will get priority. But essentially everybody gets something, unless it's completely flooded and I can only coach so many crews. With regards to the weekend, each squad on the Sunday we tend to get a nominated coached session. So generally the structure went the performance men in the earlier morning session, the mid-morning session with the club group, and the later morning to early afternoon session with the performance women's group.
Do you do sweep and sculling?
Yes. So in fact, we probably do a little bit more sweep than sculling. And certainly after the first year, I think there was lots of notions that we were seen to be only a sweep club, but I think we've certainly put some ideas in terms of how our repertoire has been built up in sculling as well as sweep.
Now, talk me through what was the pathway through that sort of 15-month period that's led to the Victor Ludorum Prize.
Well, I think the first thing that we had was we were generating in the first season. We started pretty well, and we only did the Sunday of Brit Masters last year, and we managed to come in the top 5 in the Victor Ludorum, which was a pretty good result for one day's work. And the way that we saw things was that we could really open this up. So we really only focused on sweep because that's day 2. I think we had one non-champ sculling event, and she did really well, but really realistically we were underrepresented in sculling, which probably led to those assumptions being laid forward. So we looked at things and we decided, okay, we really want to do 2 days, and we want to do both sculling and sweep. And we want to really bring a bigger umbrella in, so that we started to incorporate incentive for some of the club group. The those who are up and coming shot at the non-champ events, and that really paid off well in terms of there was some really exciting racing. Whether they won or not, there was some really exciting races that we got to see, and that essentially ended up with that final result.
Just explain what the non-champ event is for people who are outside the UK. It's essentially a non-champ event. It was designed by British Rowing about 12 years ago, where those who hadn't won at a championship event could compete, which meant that those who had actually started rowing as a master would then be able to compete, and that essentially made things a lot fairer, because essentially if you're just starting out and you want to actually cut your teeth in an event, then coming up against an ex-Olympian might be a bit of a tough ask, and it might be difficult for you to feel that you're actually going to ever be competitive. So that was brought in, and it was a very popular measure. And obviously there were a bit of rumblings early on in the year, and I'm very glad that British Rowing opted to keep the format as it was. So I was very happy with that. Can you ever regress out of the non-championship event? If you're like the last man into an 8, you win a medal in the non-champ event, that means that forever after in the future you can only do championship events.
No, I think the ruling is that it's winners from the championship events which aren't eligible for non-champ.
But if you win a non-champ event, can you continue to enter non-champ?
Yes, you can. Yep.
So how do you ever progress out of it?
Well, essentially that's more of an ethical question. So if I was to look at things, so I would be looking at people and I would be going, well, if you have won non-champ last year, then the natural progression would be to go into champ the year afterwards. I think that's a reasonable target. It is, there's always going to be that point where you are going to be asking people, but there were certainly some people who were non-champ eligible that I opted to only race champ, mainly because I believe that they had already shown their worth. So there was one athlete who had won at Henley Masters. So I wasn't going to ask her to race non-champ, because that would be against the spirit of the rules that we put forward.
So talk to us a little bit about how you select your crews, Tim.
So actually the selection for the Brit Masters cruise, well, that's there might be some choice selection. So I tended to work on various different formats. So quite a few of them would be subjective, but essentially we're looking at 3 factors in terms of their technical capabilities, what I think they're capable of doing in terms of water work, their capability to their team building commitment. So those who rock up, do the work, and are reliable in their output and their approach, and generally are quite people feel happy to be in boats with. That's a real fillip for them. So those are fairly high on the list criteria that I'm looking for. The other one would be coachability. So the capability for them to change, and you obviously having to make adjustments for the frequency of sessions that they can do, and the ability for them to change within those sessions. So those are 2 aspects. So essentially, if I select a crew, I'm expecting that crew to be at the slowest it can be before I then take it to competition, because if they aren't coachable, they're not going to get any faster. The other aspect is, and was slightly controversial, is a weight-adjusted ergo test. So that's worked for the men. For the women, we didn't focus on that so much. But that essentially was part of the overall selection for choice boats. However,
Was it a 1K erg test?
It was 1K, yeah. It was specific to the distance that we're looking to do. So for a head, it would be 5K. For sprints, as soon as we hit sprint season, it's 1K. For those lucky enough to go for Henley, well, obviously we did too. But the other factor was that we had to actually, our target was top 3 in Victor Ludorum. To actually do the Victor Ludorum, what we needed to do was train people to be able to cope with multi-event, because realistically it wasn't about selecting one crew. It was about formulating people to be able to do anything up to 6 events over the course of the weekend.
Okay.
Yeah. And
that could be a heat and a semi-final and a final.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, we never. It was always heat to final or straight final. So yeah, but you could have potentially 12 races over the course of a weekend, which is a lot. But realistically, what we'd done a pretty successful training format in the run into the World Masters in Libourne, where we'd worked that, and people were doing anything up to 5 flat out 1Ks in the day. So and we got very good results in Libourne. We were 3rd in the table at the end. So we knew that in the performance groups there was certainly that scope, and those who stepped up from the club group, they really did pull it out. So that was a really good return we got for our effort. So I think that we definitely looked at things. So whilst we might have gone, well, okay, there's this choice boat which we think will have a really good shot at gold, we're always looking at essentially the approach of points mean prizes, that it's about people generating a high level performance that may or may not win, and we operate on the picket fence result mentality, that a close win, a close loss is still a benefit if we're still racking up the points towards the total tally. And that's essentially how things worked. Obviously for the non-champ, it's win or nothing, but it's still for them, it's also about the experience of going out there and doing 6-lane racing.
So where to next? The club's had obviously 2 good seasons back to back.
So obviously we just finished Henley Masters, and we got 2 wins, which is matched what we did last year. Potentially we could have that it was a very tight race in the men's event where we lost by a small margin. So there was another one in the offing, but I think we probably didn't focus on that specific event so much. So that's perhaps one of those drawbacks. But yeah, there's still some very good racing there. But next up, on Monday we're all off to Euromasters.
Yeah.
So very much on a similar format that we worked for Libourne last year, but this time slightly less preparation, mainly because it's off the back of Brit Masters and Henley Masters. So instead of having 2 months to prepare, we've had 3 weeks. So it will be a very interesting experience to see how things go, how well we've prepared, and how the group moves on. It's a slightly different group, so I'm not having the same expectations as we had before, but I'd like to see how things go there. And then beyond that, we will go back into looking at getting back into local regattas, getting back into some more unified club events that we want to get into. There's a couple of guys, one crew I think is looking to do the Head of the Charles, and that's going to be a big challenge for them. But realistically, it's come the autumn, we're looking, essentially coming the late summer, we're looking at what heads we want to do, what our targets are going to be for the next 12 months, and look at setting up what we do over the next cycle.
And What advice do you have finally, Tim, for another club who might be looking to get onto a similar competitive pathway?
So I think the idea is what you're looking at is generating the culture. So what you with Masters Rowing, there's a vast array of people that you are dealing with at various different levels of capability and experience, and therefore selecting crews can be quite tricky. What we look to generate was a common culture. Obviously, a uniform style would be really handy if you are jumping in and out of boats. It's the common culture, the idea that everyone's picking up for everyone else and bringing it on. That's a really important factor into generating a level of club success. If it's if you pigeonhole just a few individuals, then you're never really going to get the broad scope for generating success, and then you and developing from underneath is a really important thing to help with the differing levels of abilities.
Tim, thank you so much for joining me and sharing the insights into how Monmouth Rowing Club have built up their master squad and obviously had some extreme race success. I wish you all the best for the future, and please tell the listeners if they want to connect with you or join the club, how they should do that.
Okay, thanks very much, Rebecca.
So what an interesting guy.
Very much so.
Tell us, what were your first impressions, Marlene?
An amazing amount of organization, I would say, and a great deal of time and thought obviously went into their reorganization and how they were going to set things up and how to have a strategy for managing 60 masters rowers and blending them together and mixing the crews, and it's just a tremendous, I think, just behind the scenes, a tremendous amount of work of just thoughtful work into really creating that structure that was kind of purposeful, and having each person understand where they fit in and how they were part of the big picture.
I think that could be summarized with the word pathway, so that people could see where to next. And I thought that one of the very smart things that he did was to introduce sculling to an already strong sweep club. Mm-hmm. So even the most experienced sweep rowers had a new challenge, which was either, he said, mixed rowing and sculling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So it introduces a whole nother challenge, but also another way for them to improve their skills, especially if they're used to rowing big boats and now they start rowing small boats. That's going to, as they learn small boat rowing, it's going to improve their skills to bring back into the big boats too. So, so it's a win-win type of situation.
He must have worked very hard on fitness. That program.
Yes, I would imagine. I would imagine so. But as he said, they have a pretty strong group of people who are focused on nationals and the international events. So those people already know how to train, and they know how to row hard and to work hard. So to mix in the other people, the learn to row people and the other people coming up in the same boats or in the same sessions, they also learn how to row hard, because obviously when someone just starts rowing, if they perhaps, if they didn't come from an athletic background in another competitive sport, they don't understand for quite a long time what it means to really work hard or row hard, right? So and that's where the experience of racing comes in, because they know how to race. And, that's a whole nother level of rowing versus, versus fitness rowing, is to know how to race and have a competitive mindset.
I think he's helped in some part by the structure of the British Masters Championships with this non-championship plus championship event, because it seems that, your top people can only do championship events, but everybody else can then help out with the non-championship events,
Mm-hmm.
and they can make, a really good effort at, putting a slightly mixed ability crew together.
Yeah, and he's very creative. You have to be, in this type of, it's a large, it's a large group of people. And as you said, with masters, everybody's a little bit different. You have a lot of individual situations. So the fact that he kind of emphasized that it was important to be coachable, it was important to be flexible, and everybody's got to train up to a fitness level that they've got to be able to row multiple events. And I absolutely think that is key. And that's certainly, like in my coaching with masters, that's always been a key focus, because some of those teams, everybody rows the maximum number of races, which means that in the off season, you've got to build a huge aerobic base to be able to recover from those races, race by race, session by session. He who has the best recovery wins at the end. Recovery meaning not off the water in the boat, but between events. So training people with that in mind, also puts a big emphasis on why you've got to do the aerobic endurance. It's not just racing pieces to win the regatta. You have to still be able to race the last race on Sunday afternoon.
I like the fact that he differentiates between local events that, as a leading club in the region, they feel they should support. And you could see that could make a really good pathway of teaching racing skills to less experienced people.
Yes, and something that doesn't require such a huge investment in the sense of time and travel and money for those people to see, do they even like racing? Do they want to race? Because first you have to see if you like it. And then obviously if they get involved in it, going to something like the British Rowing Championships involves more travel and involves, a few overnight stay and travel. So financially it's a bigger investment. And, the local regattas is a nice way for people to just see what kind of, do they like racing, and do they like maybe they love the atmosphere of the regatta and they want to go just to the regatta itself as an event. So I think that's a really important base of the pyramid, so to speak.
Certainly when I teach Learn to Row, very few people, when you ask them, say, the reason I'm learning to row is because I want to race. It's like they come to it gradually.
Yes, for sure. I think the people who will be interested in competition might be, say, somebody who rowed in university and then was away from rowing for a certain number of years and then comes back to rowing later on. They might be thinking right away, well, they get into rowing and then they get the bug again, right? But usually the new people coming in, it takes a while. Especially in small boats, to even get confident enough that you can row hard. You know what I mean? So from a technical point of view, that takes a bit of time in itself. So
it certainly does. So congratulations to Tim, to Monmouth Rowing Club, and for your excellent achievements. And for anyone else who's interested in learning more, just check out Monmouth Rowing Club. They're online in most of the big places. Till next week.
Part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network. Please tell your rowing friends about the show. And if you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.